Welcome to the Develop Great Managers podcast, where you can learn directly from the experts. I'm Dale Ferrario, your host. For more information and valuable insights, go to developgreatmanagers.com. Now, on to the show. Hi, and welcome to the first of two podcasts on technical program managers with Orna Berryman. This podcast follows the goal that I set up this year to be more focused on the topics that are most interesting to you, my listeners. It's a bit different than the last time in that I brought in an expert who can help me. This expert is Orna Berryman. Orna has worked at some great companies, including Intel, One Workplace, Cadence Design Systems, Electronic Arts, NVIDIA, VMware, Google, and Facebook. She has experience in training, organizational development, software development management, program management, release management, and of course, management of technical program managers. I got to know Orna at VMware, where she demonstrated incredibly strong leadership and management skills. I could not be happier to have Orna on the show. This podcast will cover TPMs, what they do, how to interact with them, roles and responsibilities, and the key skills that they have. I really hope that you enjoy this podcast. Hi, Orna. Hey, it is so great to have you on the podcast. I've been wanting to talk to you for such a long time. We haven't kept up, but we got a chance to talk a little bit yesterday. I think what we're going to do is something so different this time. The first time we're going to talk about the topics, which is what my listeners really want to know about. They want to know about these topics, but they would rather hear it from experts, not just from me. So I'm super excited to have you on the show.
I'm delighted, Dale. Wonderful to see you. You look great. Maybe everybody should do podcasts because it certainly looks great. And I can't wait to share it with all your listeners.
Yeah, and I love it. If anybody's actually watching this, your background is absolutely gorgeous. You know, the mountains with the snow, my background from Norway. So maybe we just set the tone, right? Of, yes, you know, get outside and go hike. So.
A little bit of fantasy doesn't hurt at Corona times, right?
Especially
definitely helps.
We're all stuck in our offices at home. So the reason I really wanted to reach out to you in particular is technical program management. You have been doing this for a long time. You did it as an individual contributor. Now you're managing teams, or you've been managing teams for a while. And I think it's a topic that our managers really want to understand is what exactly do they do? How is the best way to work with them? And so I really want to dig in deep. And this will end up being two separate podcasts, but I want to dig in deep and I want to talk about that topic. And I want you just to share everything that you know and help our managers just to be more effective.
Sounds great. So where can we start?
Where do you want to start? Let's just start out with the really simple, what exactly is a technical program manager?
Great question that a lot of people ask. It's actually a pretty new discipline, and it started by dev managers looking around and say, there's a lot of coordination here. There's a lot of things I need to do, reach out, track, where are we? And as a result, they started to have a function of people that are by their side as a team and help them get organized. That was the beginning.
That was how it really all started.
That's how it started. And it's actually a really new discipline in some companies and there is a bit of a confusion between project manager, program manager, operations person, chief of staff.
So can you talk about that? Because I know even when I said it, I probably stumbled a little bit. Is it technical program management? Is it technical project management? What's the difference between technical and non-technical program and project management? So talk a little bit about, the differences and exactly what that technical program manager is.
Great, and I'd be happy to. But generally, I just want to start by the array of things that the TPMs do. A lot of people call them the glue. I don't particularly like that term, but I think it has something to say about I'm going to find the cracks in whatever you need to do, and I'm going to fill them. And this is actually a reflection of the variety of what we do. So we reach out to cross-functional areas. We help you guide you as a manager to get to, do you have goals? Is the roadmap clear? Do
Have
we
you
need a
really thought this thing through, or are you just making
yeah.
it up along the way?
And do you need an expert, by the way? Maybe we should get a product manager here to give us like a use case and to actually go and talk to customers. But the TPM needs to know all of the array of all the players to know where the holes are. You'll
Yeah.
see TPMs that walk into an organization, as happened to us, if you remember, with NSX, with the NSBU, where when I walked in, it was really about, where are we stuck in releasing? Why can't we release the bloody thing? And
Yeah.
sorry about my cursing, but the point was really about seeing the whole, and the whole was at the time that our build and processes around check-in were not stable. So that's where TPM goes in and says, oh, I can give you a schedule until tomorrow, but this is a hole you need to plug. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean by glue. Other TPMs would help get organized. So if you think, for example, of the product manager, he'll take the binocular and say, I want the product to go to direction X. This is where we need to get to next year. The company goes in that direction, the market, the customers. So that would be a product manager. Then the TPM takes the wheel and say, that is how we're going to navigate to get there.
Right. Right.
And so I like the binocular and wheel analogy, because I walk into situations at work where you see those conflicts. Like, what's your role? Why are you even talking about roadmap when I'm the product manager?
Yeah.
And I saw product managers that are just by nature organized and get a spreadsheet going, and a TPM walks in, is like, you're doing my job.
Wait, that's my job. Yeah, exactly. So you started to answer maybe my next question, and maybe we'll weave it in together. But there's sort of these three different groups that tend to be, maybe in every one of these projects. It's a technical program manager, it's the product manager, and then the engineering manager. So can you kind of talk about how those three teams work together and how they divide their roles up?
Right, I'd love to. So think of a Venn diagram, just a visual of like three circles, and there's something that meets in the middle, because nothing is as pure as we would like it to be. So I would think the best place to start is where maybe most of the listeners, where they are, is the engineering manager. I expect these folks to write code, have engineers reporting to them, understand the system architecture, the product requirements, implementation, and technical design. They might get assistance from an architect. The product manager is going to tell you where the product needs to go, and that overlaps with the engineering manager, because they often know, yeah, pretty
They have an
much.
idea where they want it to go as well,
Yeah.
right?
And that's where the tension begins, and that's the beauty of this role, right? Because it's always like a lot of negotiation. But they will bring insights about the market. There's a product market fit. They'll talk about a vision, they'll talk about customers and the place where the company wants to go, and they'll probably think of the revenue, which is so critical, and sometimes the EM does not. So that gives a little bit of that yin and yang. And then the TPM says, great, I know where we need to go. EM, you are going to do it. Let's talk about how we're going to execute this strategy. How are we going to simplify? How will you know where you are?
Yeah.
So I would say it's almost like that I'm charting the road. This is where I want to go. But the TPM is with the map throughout the road, navigating us to get there and making sure that we are on time. Because I would say, if you ask me, Dale, to summarize who we are as TPMs, we're the lawyers of the schedule and the time. We deliver. It has to be, I always look at my watch. I'm still an analog kind of girl, right? So, because it's all about the timing and the fact that it actually gets done.
I think that's a really good description. I don't even know if you know this, but early in my career, I was the first ever program manager at Sun Microsystems when we built Solaris. So it's the first time they decided it was important to have a program manager, because the team had gotten big enough that it could no longer kind of run on its own with engineering managers. But anyway, I for all the same reasons that probably you got into this, I think it's incredibly hard when you have these two teams who are all trying to do the right thing for the product, but somebody's got to decide, well, how many features can we fit in versus how much infrastructure work are we going to do in the product, and how are we going to lay out that schedule, and how are we going to make sure that it's staffed in the right way, and how are, like you said, how are we going to make sure there's all the right checkpoints along the way so we know if we're on track. When something comes up, how are we going to decide together what we're going to go do? I think that TPM is just so critical early throughout the whole life of the, and then of course we know when you get to the end, there's so much pressure to get that thing out the door. Somebody's got to say, wait a minute, we got these bugs. Have we made sure that we got the feedback from the customers before we actually decide to ship? So I think I don't like the word glue because it sounds like you're just trying to hold it together. I feel like it's something more about every step along the way. The TPM is making sure that everybody's aligned about how you're going to get it done, where you are, what's left to do, are you on track? Yeah.
And I think I'm going back to your Solaris days, because I think the best EMs, and you were a manager at the time, right? So the best engineering managers are the ones that actually understand the discipline and maybe either invite someone to work with them along these lines, or actually do it themselves. It's just getting too big, and it really is useful for a manager to have a TPM by their side. They walk the halls, they understand where the team is, understand where we are when we need to go, and they become sort of a significant other to you. They will tell you actually what the team is doing. So if you want a pretty picture, it's not going to come from the TPMs. They'll tell you the truth.
Somebody's got to be the truth teller, right?
There you go. And if we don't know the truth, we're going to find out. That would be an issue. But usually we find out where the team is and where the obstacles are, and warn everybody. The best TPMs do tons of work behind the scenes. I don't know if we ever decided to talk about how we do our job, but it is really the best thing to understand. It's not just about the presentations and the status and the red, yellow, green. It is all the work in the background that we get you to where you want to be. And I can share a story about that if you want.
Yeah, do please. Yeah.
Yeah, if you remember when we were trying to close on vSphere 6.0, and there were, just to have folks understand the scale, there were 1,300 engineers working on it. Your large team was one of the teams, and the UI team was wickedly behind.
Yeah, I completely remember that.
And I remember, Dale, you depend on them as much as they depended on you, and the uncomfortable quiet in the room with Ray in the room, and it's like, okay, how are we going to bridge this? What can we do? Because the UI eventually determines quite a lot of the success of all the back end. And as a TPM at the time, I realized it pretty quickly and got the leadership support. We did a war room. We got everybody together. We actually fed them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. PMs showed up in the room. Managers came. You came to cheer everybody up. Ray showed up to see how things are doing, and we were able to pull it in. I wouldn't say that, could we have done things sooner? Probably yes, but the TPM role here was a warning sign and finding the structure to bring a tough release that was really large. It was close to 1,000 features to the market on time.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely remember that. And I remember, and I've seen many releases that kind of go that way where, some group, and it may be a mistake they made or unexpected complexity or whatever it might be, but somebody gets behind, and the TPM is so important in saying, all right, we have a problem. What are we going to go do about it? How are we going to put together a get well plan? Who do we need help from? Do you need resources? What do you need to get this thing back on track?
Right.
And I think that it's invaluable. So why don't you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think we're heading toward that anyway. I wanted to ask what makes a great TPM, but it's probably not enough just to say what makes a great TPM, but what do they really need to be able to do? What skills do they have to have? What kind of personality do they need to have to fill that role and really be good?
That's a long answer, so I'll summarize. But I'm going to wrap it actually with some stories, because companies like Facebook and Google, hopefully the listeners find this interesting, not only study this, like what makes a great TPM, but actually cater the interviewing questions to screen for every single quality of such. So being organized, being able to form partnerships, have a strong sense of leadership, being a great communicator and a great writer. You need to know how to speak, who to speak to, and in what context, all the array of communication venues and avenues and style. You need to be a negotiator and a persuader.
Yes.
I cannot recommend enough the Cialdini book about persuasion, because it actually is geared towards salespeople. But it talks, it's a classic, and we're teaching Cialdini to the TPMs at Facebook, because it's so great how to persuade and negotiate. And not to underscore, the last but not least, is the most important thing, is the ability to be comfortable with technical terms. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that if you are a person from networking or distributed systems, you have to like know everything. You can't walk into a room and not understand the context of what these teams are doing, the complexity of it. And at the very least, you will understand if somebody's going to trick you or tries to give you something that is like an overcommit. And there were many situations, I have to tell you how I handled it when I went to the networking business unit. You and I worked on vSphere, a very complex state-of-the-art distributed system. And I moved to networking, and honestly, I did not know anything about networking. I knew the very small piece of vSphere, but certainly not the whole array. So I bought the Networking for Dummies book, which is like 7 books in one. And I started running with my husband, who's an expert in networking. And I said, you know what? This is not a running about the kids. We're going to talk about networking.
We're going to talk about networking.
There you go. I want to know the protocols. What is L4 to L7? And I need to understand what each of them does. So, and this was a journey. Eventually, I was able to walk into a room with architects just to talk about the TPM, what a TPM will do to dive into an area. The architects of the networking business unit needed someone to get them together to talk about major technical problems. And I thought, what could be a better place for me to be? I can learn everything I need from the top architects of the group and help them at the same time. So I'm giving you this as an example of the skills of a TPM, where you do what it takes, you learn the area, you try to be deeply technical, and you get the connections to people at the same time. So I would say these are the traits. And without the technical ability in high tech, of course, if you're in the medical field, you'd have to understand medical.
A different set of things,
yeah,
right.
But you have to understand the area, not to the extent of an engineering manager, but to the extent of holding a conversation.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. You know, because when I think about whether you're a TPM or a manager, you know, you need to be competent in your area. You always will find people that are significantly deeper than you. I'm sure, even though your husband is a networking person, you know, there's levels of networking you don't understand, but you don't have to understand every bit of it. There are really strong, deep technical experts that'll be writing code and architecting, but you have to have enough of an understanding that you can ask good questions. You can sort of drill in and make sure that you at least believe they thought it through enough, that they've looked at what some of the risks are, that they have scoped out how big it is. At least at some level, you have to be competent enough in the area that you can then put together a good plan and understand what to watch, what to track. Exactly. So I think tremendous feat. That's really tremendous advice.
And certainly in the area of like distributed systems, that you know all the components. So one trick I learned, if I may share, which would be great for managers or TPMs, is when you walk into an organization, find out who the movers and shakers are. Yeah. And as much as Dale, you are a VP, I am, with all respect to your level and seniority, you are not necessarily always the mover and shaker of the org, right? We're talking about people who are senior ICs who've been a long time in the company, or an architect, or someone who came from a different business unit but is so networked and can
Yep.
solve things for you. Or the QE person who tells you every morning how ugly you are and you got to fix the code and here are the issues, right? So these are the movers and shakers. And what a great TPM does is they find out and they lay that land, right? They understand who those players are. And what they do is they make them their best friends.
Yeah.
So if I had to walk into a meeting, I would not do it without Pankaj, let's say, who was one of the senior architects at a networking business unit. And I'll say, Pankaj, does that look like a good idea to you? And he will say yes or no or why.
Yeah, he's going to tell you exactly whether it is
brutally honest. Or Jim Stabile, right? Oh, you've got a few of those, senior ICs who are brilliant in their field. And Andrew, you know who I'm talking about, and then you are coming in with a back, with knowledge, and that is important to calibrate. That's a good trick, by the way, for engineering managers or any manager. Figure out who those are and be close to them to balance ideas with. And the best TPMs I've seen walk into the meeting and actually have already a lot of the answers that they're trying to create as a consensus.
Yeah, I think that's good because I talked a little bit about, I did some podcasts on office politics. And when I talked about office politics, it was about understanding how to get things done and who the influences are. But in this case, I think it's slightly different. It's, who are the technical experts? Who are the ones that are going to really tell you whether your ideas are good or bad? I know certainly as a manager or as a VP, there are times when people say what they think you want to hear, as opposed to, I need to know if this is a good idea or a bad idea. Don't let me go off and propose something that's really dumb. So you need to have those people that you can count on. Also, if somebody comes in and says, I can do this in this period of time, you need to be able to go ask somebody else, can they really do that? Is that, or are they just being too optimistic, or are they just saying what they think I want them to hear, or what they want me to hear? Sorry. So I think that's great advice as well. So I think you've described really well, what a TPM, a technical program manager, the skills they need to have, kind of how they operate. Talk a little bit about, so I had one other area I thought might be interesting, is talking about Agile and talking about some of the new ways that we're building software. There are some other roles that are in there that are a little confusing. What's a product owner's role versus a TPM? What's a Scrum Master's role? Can you talk a little bit about how they fit into an Agile world?
Happy to. So, product development methodologies there's a history around that. We had waterfall and then agile, and agile has multiple flavors to it, from Scrum and from extreme programming. What is all of that at the end of the day is, how do we get to our end result, to a product that actually meets the customer demand and we want it, right? There's a very famous cartoon around a swing, how the customer described it, all the way to how we built it, to say, how do you create enough touch points along the way to know where we are? Are we in the right direction? And that's what Agile is all about. And there's a whole movement. But let's connect that to the TPM discipline. And the point here is, Scrum and overall Agile is a way for engineering to execute. It's a way for the engineering managers and the engineers themselves to direct what they work on, to understand the priorities of the day, to synchronize around where we are. That's why you've got the daily stand-ups.
Right.
And there are companies that say, you know what, we're going to be agile. This is how we're going to work. Sometimes it works. There are companies that weave into it some major milestones. For example, traditional Agile has sprints of about 4 weeks, 3 weeks, with enough flexibility to change where we go to. But think about something as vSphere that has to coordinate, 1,500, 1,300 engineers. Can we do that in an Agile fashion? And the answer is not really. Maybe a subgroup can, but not a master major release that needs to hit the market. So Agile has been developed to really tell the engineers and their managers where they are. Now, once I've got this data, and it is in a tool, it's a celebration. I can run reports, and we've done quite a few interesting analyses. So one of the examples was with the networking business unit. We learned by using Agile with all of its disruptions around, hey, a customer bug comes in and I stop doing my work, we learned that there was a huge load on the team around responding to major bugs and of the most senior ICs, and that took a lot of time from development. When we learned that, thanks to Agile and thanks for tracking, we were able to correct and say, we're going to build a team. And all they do is answer those customer calls so you guys can continue working. That was one of Jeff's ideas. So the point I'm trying to make here is that with the TPM that helps you facilitate that tracking, you as a manager can learn a lot. And I want to warn that there's a lot of allergy in the engineering team for tracking. And you can't come with a Benadryl for every meeting saying, this is what I learned. So there is a price to pay, and we need to be very sensitive to that. So we can decide what we track, maybe not everything you do every day, right? And part of the negotiation and the change management is that tension between the TPMs and the rest of the engineering org.
Yes, I completely agree. Yep.
It's up to me, Dale. I want every day to know what everybody's doing so that I can tell you, the VP, yeah, it's not going to be on time. In reality, people work harder towards a deadline. Yes. And in other realities, people don't really put their real estimates because they want to, I don't want to be behind. I'm going to tell you it's 3 weeks when it's 3 days. So that's the challenge. So I would say use it sporadically when you know that there's enough buy-in, and maybe just track what really matters and find the value for the engineers themselves. The second we talked about, we're using Agile to let you know when your time is taken for emergencies, because I want to fix that life. I don't want you to jump on customer calls and spend 24 hours on them. The compliance rose tremendously. They knew there's value to them. Yeah. And then it worked. Before that, not so much. So it maybe is not a commercial to Agile, but it definitely is a warning on how to use it.
So let me see if I can just play some of that back, because I think what you're saying is, whether you're using Agile or any other methodology, really what you want to figure out is that you have this skill set that's necessary. You have a set of things that you need to track. You have areas where you need to dig in and maybe come up with a solution, in your case, creating a separate team. The technical program manager is going to grab onto all of those areas and just try to make sure that the overall program or the overall release is going to be successful. And so if there happens to be a Scrum Master, well, great, that person will take care of that part of the job. If there happens to be a product owner, great, that person will take care of that part of the job. If it's a product manager, great, that person will take care of that piece of the job. And so it sounds like what you're really looking at is we can scale to different processes, but the TPM ends up coming in and finding those areas that really need attention, puts the plan together, make sure that the measures are in place, make sure it's being tracked, make sure it's being communicated. Right. Have those conversations that need to happen in the background, right? And really spends a lot of time supporting, especially the engineering managers, as kind of their right-hand person to make sure that they have the visibility they need. Is that a good way to describe it?
This is the best way, exactly. And also give good advice. So if an engineer, and I had that situation, by the way, in one of my job interviews, a job I didn't take, I had an engineering manager, very senior guy, who said, I want you to implement Agile across my entire org. And I'm thinking, okay, that's going to go well. I said, why? And he was a bit surprised.
What's the problem you're trying to solve there?
Exactly. Tell me what you really want to get to. He says, because we don't execute. I said, oh, okay, let's dig into that. Why? And as I started peeling with 5 whys, you get to something. And it turns out they actually have doesn't have a clear direction where they need to go, because there was a huge markets change and people have to stop what they're doing and start something else, and that something else is not defined. I mean, I could put 7 tools in front of you. Is that going to solve it? And likely not. No. And the other thing is so that's something to, in terms of, yeah, we got Agile. It's a tool. We've got other tools. Here's another tool. A TPM walks in and says, okay, I see that there's no execution here. What are the compelling events that would cause people to want to come and show their work. So Agile has a built-in mechanism.
Yep.
It has these reviews that we do at the end of a sprint, and it's kind of a nice thing. People show up to view, they show their work. It's a celebration, actually. And then we do a postmortem. It's a learning moment. Blameless, rankless, of course. And these are wonderful principles. You don't have to call it Agile. Just do it. Once a month, feature review. Postmortem or lessons learned every month and a half. Why not? Right? So you can do it without calling it, or just weave the best of with what makes sense for the team. So that's where the TPMs come in. They have the knowledge, they know the tools, but I wouldn't just apply and say, we've got a rule, this is how we do it. Just be more sensitive and do the best of, and see what fits the team, fits the environment, and fits the product.
And the skills of the people that you have.
Right.
Okay, I think that's a really good place to wrap up our first interview, our first podcast. Next time we'll come back and talk a bit more about more about the role of the manager, more about how they can make sure that these kinds of things work well together. And I think we'll also touch on, you've been at VMware, you've been at Google, you're at Facebook, some of the differences and similarities. So let's wrap it up for now, and we'll start back up in the next podcast.
Happy to. Thank you, Dale.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard, there are more podcasts available on developgreatmanagers.com, on iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have time, please post a comment, or better yet, please write a review. Talk to you in the next podcast.